Mr. Speaker, I know that members across the House share my concern about the situation in Afghanistan, the issues it raises for our own security, and the fears of many remaining in that country, especially women and children. The sacrifice in Afghanistan is seared into our national consciousness, with 150,000 people serving there from across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, including a number of members on all sides of the House whose voices will be particularly important today. And so it's absolutely right that we should come together for this debate. And, Mr. Speaker, yes, I will certainly give way to my right honourable friend.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. As someone who opposed this nation-building intervention, it now brings its responsibilities. In addition to getting our nationals out safely and in offering a generous welcome to the many refugees, will the Prime Minister assure me that all necessary resources are given to those Afghans and others who have helped the British Council in its work, including the promotion of women's rights, because many are in fear of their lives of retribution from the Taliban? The Arab scheme is slow-moving at the moment. Will he commit the necessary resource? Because the window of opportunity is narrow and no one must be left behind.
Got the point. Can I just remind people, if you are going to intervene, they've got to be short. If you intervene more than twice, you'll understand why you've gone down the list, if there was one. Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I can assure him that I will, and as I will be saying in just a few moments, we will be supporting, doing everything we can to support those who have helped the UK mission in Afghanistan and investing everything that we can to support the wider area around Afghanistan and to do everything we can to avert a humanitarian crisis. Mr. Speaker, it's almost 20 years since the United States suffered the most catastrophic attack on its people since the Second World War, in which 67 British citizens also lost their lives at the hands of murderous terrorist groups incubated in Afghanistan. In response, NATO invoked Article 5 of its treaty for the first and only time in its history. And the United Kingdom, amongst others, joined America in going into Afghanistan on a mission to extirpate al-Qaeda in that country and to do whatever we could to stabilise Afghanistan in spite of all the difficulties and challenges we knew that we would face. And we succeeded in that core mission. And yes, I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, but would he agree that we are actually ceding back the country to the very insurgency that we went in to defeat in the first place? And the reputation of the West to support democracies across the world has suffered. There are so many lessons to be learned from what happened over the last 20 years. Will he now agree to an independent, formal inquiry into the conduct in Afghanistan?
Mr. Speaker, as I said in the House just a few weeks ago, there was an extensive defence review about the Afghan mission after the combat mission ended in 2014, and I believe that most of the key questions have already been extensively gone into. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we in this House should today be able to scrutinise events as they unfold. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, we succeeded in that core mission, and the training camps in the mountain ranges of Afghanistan were destroyed. Al-Qaeda plots against this country were foiled because our serving men and women were there. And no successful terrorist attacks against the West have been mounted from Afghan soil for 2 decades. Happily give way to my right honourable friend.
Prime Minister, can I just take him back to his remarks in the House of July the 8th when he referred to the assessment that he'd made? There's clearly been a catastrophic failure of our intelligence or our assessment of the intelligence because of the speed that this has caught us unawares. Can the Prime Minister set out for the House how we may assure ourselves that in future years we can make sure there are no future terrorist attacks put together in Afghanistan that take place here in the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be fair to say that the events in Afghanistan have unfolded and the collapse has been faster than I think even the Taliban themselves predicted. What is not true is to say that the UK government was unprepared or did not foresee this, because it was certainly part of our planning, pitting the very difficult logistical operation for the withdrawal of UK nationals has been under preparation for many months, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the House that the decision to commission the emergency handling centre at the airport, the commissioning of that centre, took place 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker. So, if I can just make a little bit more progress, Mr. Speaker. If I just a little bit, I will certainly give way in a moment. Alongside this core mission, we worked for a better future for the people of Afghanistan. And the heroism and tireless work of our armed forces contributed to national elections, as well as the promotion and protection of human rights and equalities in a way that many in Afghanistan had not previously known. Whereas 20 years ago, almost no girls went to school and women were banned from positions of governance, now 3.6 million girls have been in school this year alone, and women hold over a quarter of the seats in the Afghan parliament. But Mr. Speaker, we must be honest and accept that huge difficulties were encountered at each turn, and some of this progress is fragile. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to our ambassador and the diplomatic team in Kabul and our armed forces on the ground who have been evacuating people in extraordinary circumstances. But one of the consequences of the rapidity of the collapse of Kabul is that many people have been left trapped, unable to access the airport, unable to evacuate, including many of those who should be coming to this country, who served us bravely in that country, and many women who are particularly at risk. Many of us across this House will have experienced chaos in the last 24, 48 hours in communicating information through to the ground to get some of those people out of the country. So can the Prime Minister give us some assurances about how we can get that information through so that we can get those brave people out of there, including many at risk of their lives right now in Kabul?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises exactly the right question. I spoke this morning to Ambassador Salori Bristow as well as to Brigadier Dan Blanchford, who's handling the evacuation. And it'd be fair to say the situation has stabilised since the weekend, but it remains precarious. And the UK officials on the ground are doing everything that they can to expedite the movement of people, those that need to come out, whether from the Arab scheme or the eligible persons, to get from Kabul to the airport. And at the moment, it would be fair to say that the Taliban are allowing that evacuation to go ahead. But the most important thing, Mr. Speaker, is that we get this done in as expeditious a fashion as we can, and that's what we are doing. And I may say that I'm grateful not just to the UK forces who are now out there helping to stabilise the airport, but also to the US forces as well.
Does he agree with me that we have to do everything we can to support those who have supported us, like the Royal Marine Penn Farthing and his NALZ charity of veterinary staff and their immediate family who now need safe passage back to the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I think, like many of us, I have been extensively lobbied on behalf of the excellent work done by Mr. Penn Farthing. I'm well aware of his cause, all the wonderful things that he has done. And for animals in Afghanistan, I can tell my honourable friend that we will do everything we can to help Mr. Penn Farthing and others who face particular difficulty like himself. And, but as I say, without in any way jeopardising our own national security. These are concerns shared across the international community, from the region itself to all the NATO alliance and indeed all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And I will chair a virtual meeting of the G7 in the coming days. Third, Mr. Speaker, we also have an enduring commitment to all the Afghan people, and now more than ever we must reaffirm that commitment. Our efforts must be focused on supporting the Afghan people in the region itself, particularly those fleeing conflict or the threat of violence. We therefore call on the United Nations to lead a new humanitarian effort in this region. And I give way to the Right Honourable Lady opposite.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and I welcome his commitment to support in the region and also the government's commitment to a resettlement programme. But could he confirm the Home Secretary announced in 2019 that the UK would continue a resettlement scheme of 5,000 refugees a year after the Syrian scheme closed? Could he confirm that the announcement today of an Afghan resettlement scheme is in addition to that existing 5,000 resettlement commitment, as opposed to simply being a refocusing or a displacement of that existing 5,000 a year resettlement programme?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady opposite, because I think she's asked a question that formed itself in many people's minds about the 5,000s. And yes, indeed, the 5,000 that extra in the resettlement scheme are additional to those already announced. And we will support those people in coming to this country. We will also support the wider international community in delivering on humanitarian projects in the region by doubling, Mr. Speaker, the amount of humanitarian and development assistance that we had previously committed to Afghanistan this year, with new funding, wait for it, Mr. Speaker, taking this up to £286 million with immediate effect. And we call on others, £286 million with immediate effect, and we call on others to work together on a shared humanitarian effort, focusing on helping the most vulnerable in what will be formidably difficult circumstances. And I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister, and he's being very generous with his time. Over the past 20 years, there have been some 50 NATO and partner nations that have been involved in Afghanistan. I welcome the measures that have been proposed by the UK and other countries such as the US, Canada, France, Germany, and so on. However, there are many countries still who have been involved in Afghanistan in recent years who have still yet to come to the plate and to recognise their responsibility in helping these people at this desperate time. Would the Prime Minister inform the House what is being done to encourage these other countries to take up their responsibility and help these people in Afghanistan?
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the UK has chaired the Security Council of the UN and asked to put a motion together with our French friends to get the world to focus on the humanitarian needs of Afghanistan, and we'll be doing the same thing in NATO, in the G7 and the other bodies in which we have a leadership role. And we want all these countries to step up, as he rightly says, Mr. Speaker, and focus on the most vulnerable in what will be formidably difficult circumstances. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, I've given away, I think you'll agree, quite a lot already this morning, and I know that thanks to the generosity of yourself, Mr. Speaker, and the House, there is now ample time for debate until later on this afternoon, where I think many members will be able to get their points across. I therefore intend, Mr. Speaker, by your leave, to make some progress. Fourth, while we must focus on the region itself, we will also create safe and legal routes for those Afghans most in need to come and settle here in the UK. So in addition to those Afghans with whom we've worked directly, I can announce today that we're committing to relocating another 5,000 Afghans this year with a new and bespoke resettlement scheme focusing on the most vulnerable, particularly women and children. And we will keep this under review for future years, with the potential of accommodating up to 20,000 over the long term. And so, taken together, Mr. Speaker, I've been very generous with my interventions. I think you will agree already, and I've made my position clear. Taken together, Mr. Speaker, we are committing almost £500 million of humanitarian funding to support the Afghan people. Fifth, Mr. Speaker, we must also face the reality of a change of regime in Afghanistan. And as President of the G7, the UK will work to unite the international community behind a clear plan for dealing with this regime in a unified and concerted way. Over the last 3 days, I've spoken with the NATO and UN Secretaries General, with President Biden, with Chancellor Merkel, with President Macron, and Prime Minister Khan. We are clear and we have agreed that it would be a mistake for any country to recognise any new regime in Kabul prematurely or bilaterally. Instead, those countries that care about Afghanistan's future should work towards common conditions about the conduct of the new regime before deciding, together, whether to recognise it and on what terms. We will judge this regime based on the choices it makes and by its actions rather than by its words. On its attitude to terrorism, to crime and narcotics, as well as humanitarian access and the rights of girls to receive an education. Defending human rights will remain of the highest priority, and we will use every available political and diplomatic means to ensure that those human rights remain at the top of the international agenda. Mr. Speaker, our United Kingdom has a roll call of honour that bears the names of 457 servicemen and women who gave their lives in some of the world's harshest terrain, and many others who bear injuries to this day, fighting in what had become the epicentre of global terrorism. And even amid the heart-wrenching scenes we see today, I believe they should be proud of their achievements. And we should be deeply proud of them, because they conferred benefits that are lasting and ineradicable on millions of people in one of the poorest countries on earth. And they provided vital protection for 2 decades to this country and the rest of the world. They gave their all for our safety, and we owe it to them to give our all to prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a breeding ground for terrorism. Because no matter how grim the lessons of the past, the future is not yet written. And at this bleak turning point, we must help the people of Afghanistan to choose the best of all their possible futures. And in the UN, the G7, in NATO, with friends and partners around the world, that is the critical task on which this government is now urgently engaged and will be engaged in the days to come.